in the last lecture, we started discussing about the chemical and physical properties of nucleic acids. We discussed two properties. One was absorbance and the second one was density. Absorbance is used to find out the concentration of nucleic acids, the yield of nucleic acids and the purity of nucleic acids in the sample. Density is used to find out the GC content in the DNA sample and how many highly repetitive sequences or what percentage of the genome is highly repetitive in a particular DNA sequence. In this lecture, we will be discussing some other properties of the nucleic acids, that is how nucleic acids behave when they are denatured is the next property that we are discussing in this lecture. So the third property that we'll be discussing here is denaturation. DNA denaturation is the process whereby hydrogen bonds that hold two strands together weaken and finally break. The denaturation can be biologically induced and it can also be non-biologically induced. Biologically induced denaturation is at the time of replication when the DNA strands they open up and on the parent DNA strands, daughter DNA strands are synthesized. At the time of transcription, a transcription bubble is created on which the RNA polymerase enzyme copies the template strand into the RNA strand. Then at the time of DNA repair also, DNA strands are opened, the DNA is repaired. So these categories, they fall under biologically induced denaturation. Now denaturation can also be non-biological, like denaturation by heating or by providing temperature, denaturation by certain chemicals, denaturation by low salt concentration. Now low salt concentration removes ions that stabilize the negative charges on the two strands, thereby denaturing DNA. So low salts can be used, temperature can be used. Apart from temperature, certain chemicals can be used, organic solvents like dimethyl sulfoxide or commonly DMSO and formamide, they can also break hydrogen bond between DNA strands, thereby denaturing a DNA molecule. So denaturation can also be defined as the conversion of a double-stranded DNA into two single-stranded molecules. Or we can also say the native form of DNA, that is a double-stranded DNA, is converted into a random coil conformation or the single-stranded form of DNA. Now denaturation can easily be monitored using a very simple instrument, that is a spectrophotometer. Now in the last lecture we discussed about the property that is absorption, and I told you that free nitrogenous bases, they absorb maximum ultraviolet light at 260 nanometers. A double-stranded DNA absorbs minimally, and when you convert it into the single-stranded form, when you denature a double-stranded DNA, you can study this denaturation by noting that there is an increase in the absorption at 260 nanometers. So if a standard double-stranded DNA sample is set to 1 unit at 260 nanometers, what we find is that when the DNA denatures, there is an increase of approximately 37% in the absorption at 260 nanometers. So we can monitor denaturation by noting down increase in the ultraviolet absorption at 260 nanometers, where the double-stranded DNA will give you minimum absorption, and when it is converted into the single stranded form, when the nitrogenous bases are comparatively free, when you compare it to a double stranded DNA, they absorb more ultraviolet light at 260 nanometers. There are different methods to denature the DNA. The first one, which we will also be using in the laboratory, is temperature. Now temperature can be used to denature the DNA or to melt the DNA molecule. We also call denaturation as melting of DNA. So this is a reversible change. You can heat the DNA strand, you denature it, you gradually cool the DNA, you will renature or reanneal the DNA molecule. Now temperature can be used to denature the DNA molecule. And how do we study the effect of this temperature? How do we monitor whether the DNA has been converted into the from double stranded into the single stranded form? We plot a curve. So on this curve, on the x-axis we will take temperature, on the y-axis we will take relative absorbance relative to what we get at the room temperature. So relative absorbance is taken at the y-axis, temperature is taken at the x-axis. So you have a double stranded DNA solution, you take it at room temperature and you set the absorbance value as 1 unit, and then you start heating the sample. You've noted the value of absorbance at room temperature, or you set the value of absorbance to 1 unit at room temperature, and then you start heating the DNA sample. Now when you go to 40 degrees Celsius, you go to 50 degrees Celsius, you go to 60 degrees Celsius, 70, 80, 90. Suppose you are heating the sample, and initially after every 10 degrees Celsius, you again check the absorbance at 260 nanometers. Now what we find is that DNA remains very stable up to at least a temperature of 80 degrees Celsius. So the absorbance value, the relative absorbance at a particular temperature divided by the absorbance value you got at the room temperature, that relative absorbance value will remain almost constant, which states that DNA is still in the double stranded form and it has not started converting into the single stranded form. Above about 82 degrees Celsius, depending upon the GC content of the DNA molecule, the absorbance value will increase. And there is just a range of 6 to 8 degrees Celsius where the rise can be seen. So if it starts say about around 83-84 degrees Celsius, you will find this rise up to 89-90 degrees Celsius, and then again this will become a constant value. So this rise, here you have a double stranded DNA completely, here you have a single stranded DNA completely. What has been found is the absorbance value here will be 1.37, or from the initial value there will be a 37% increase in absorbance. Now this rise, here the DNA is double stranded, here it is in the single stranded form. This rise is measured with the help of a scale, and the midpoint of this rise is taken. The midpoint is then extrapolated to the x-axis and we get the value in degrees Celsius. This value is known as Tm, where Tm stands for melting temperature. That is the temperature at which approximately 50% of the DNA is in the double stranded form and 50% is in the single stranded form. So Tm value can be calculated by this curve. This curve is known as a melting curve. So a melting curve is a curve that is plotted between temperature at the x-axis, absorbance at the y-axis, What we note in this curve is DNA is a very stable molecule. Up to about 82 degrees Celsius, the DNA will remain in the double-stranded form. Above that temperature, the DNA will start melting, and that melt can be monitored by noting increase in ultraviolet absorption. So this Tm value basically varies from one DNA sample to another DNA sample. For example, a DNA molecule which has high GC content. High GC content means guanine cytosine. We know there is a triple bond between guanine and cytosine. So to break that bond, you will require more amount of energy or more amount of heat. So a DNA which is GC rich DNA will require more temperature for melting, and therefore the Tm will be high. So more is the GC content, more will be the melting temperature. More is the AT content, less will be the melting temperature. So denaturation can be used to study the GC content of a DNA sample. The melting temperature or Tm is equals to 4 degrees Celsius multiplied by guanine plus cytosine plus 2 degrees Celsius multiplied by adenine plus thymine. So one way that we can denature and we can study the denaturation of a DNA sample is by heating the DNA sample. Heating or melting or denaturation is by which double-stranded DNA is converted to single-stranded molecules by breaking the hydrogen bond between the two strands. Another method is use of hydrophobic substances. Hydrophobic substances allow the nitrogenous bases to dissolve in the solvent, and thereby they decrease the melting temperature of DNA. So hydrophobic substances will decrease the melting temperature of DNA. On the other hand, hydrophilic substances will increase the melting temperature of DNA. Another method by which we can denature a DNA molecule is pH. Now what happens is, when you take it from the neutral, that is a value around 7, you take it to 11.3. Till 11.3, the DNA remains stable. Above 11.3, the hydrogen bonds disrupt, that is hydrogen bonds break, and the DNA will be totally denatured. So 11.3, above 11.3, the hydrogen bonds will get disrupted and the DNA will denature. When you take this pH to about 13, hydrolysis of DNA sample takes place. The nitrogenous bases will be free and they will give you maximum absorption at 260 nanometers. Now if you go towards the acidic side, what happens is, till pH 4, between pH 4 and 7, the DNA will remain stable. Approximately at pH 4 or below, the glycosidic bonds which are present between sugar and purines, this glycosidic bond breaks and purines will be released from the DNA. Such DNA is called as depurinated. So DNA depurination takes place at pH approximately 4, and at pH approximately 1, all the phosphodiester bonds, that is a bond between sugar and phosphate, and the glycosidic bonds, that is between sugar and rest of the bases, they will all break and the DNA will completely hydrolyze. So pH 1 breaks all the phosphodiester and the glycosidic bonds. pH 4 depurinates the DNA sample by breaking glycosidic bond between sugar and purines. pH above 11.3 leads to denaturation. pH approximately 13 leads to hydrolysis of DNA. On the other hand, RNA gets hydrolyzed around pH of 11. Now DNA is more stable at alkaline pH. The reason is that it does not contain 2' hydroxyl. The sugar present in DNA is 2' deoxyribose, that is at the 2' position of that pentose sugar, OH group is not present. So DNA therefore is more stable at alkaline pH because it does not contain the 2' hydroxyl for base catalyzed hydrolysis mechanism. But what happens at high pHs? At high pH there is more concentration of negatively charged OH ions, hydroxide ions. These hydroxide ions pull hydrogen from DNA towards it and makes it deprotonated. But when we talk about RNA is uniquely unstable in alkaline conditions. The reason is that there is a hydroxyl group present on the second position of the sugar, that is ribose. So RNA is unstable in alkaline conditions because bases can easily deprotonate the hydrogen from hydroxyl group that is present on the 2' carbon atom. Another method to denature DNA is ionic strength. Now DNA, if we dissolve in distilled water, it will spontaneously denature. That is due to repulsion between the negative charges of the phosphate group present in DNA. Salts, on the other hand, they will stabilize DNA molecule by neutralizing the negative charge of the phosphate groups. So if the negative charge of the phosphate group is neutralized, DNA gets stabilized, and therefore more heat or more temperature is required to break the DNA molecule, and therefore melting temperature will be higher. So if salts are stabilizing the DNA molecule, the melting temperature will be higher. Another important property of nucleic acids, that is solubility. RNA or ribonucleic acids have polar group, that is a 2' hydroxyl group present on the ribose sugar. So at the ribose sugar second position there is a hydroxyl group present. This hydroxyl group is a polar group, and therefore it is more soluble in aqueous solutions. Because it is more soluble in aqueous solutions, it is more reactive or it is less stable. On the other hand, DNA at the 2' position has a non-polar group, that is 2' H. Because of this non-polar group, it is hydrophobic in nature. That means it will be less soluble in aqueous solutions, or it will be less reactive, and it will be more stable. So RNA is more reactive, therefore less stable because of the polar hydroxyl group present at the second position of sugar. DNA has a non-polar group, therefore it is hydrophobic, less reactive or more stable. Another property is the size of a nucleic acid molecule. How to determine the size of a nucleic acid molecule? One thing we discussed in the last lecture also, the sedimentation velocity of a molecule depends upon its density and its shape. That is, if the molecule is more dense, it will quickly sediment down upon centrifugation, and also the globular molecules sediment faster than the linear molecules. Now to determine the size of a nucleic acid molecule, we use the technique of gel electrophoresis. Now gel electrophoresis, agarose gel electrophoresis we mostly use for the separation of nucleic acids. Polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis we mostly use for the separation of proteins. So agarose gel electrophoresis can be used to separate molecules that are 5 million to few thousand base pairs. On the other hand, polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis can be used to separate molecules that are 2 to several hundred base pairs. As nucleic acids are longer molecules, we use agarose gel electrophoresis for separation of nucleic acids. The nucleic acids have an overall negative charge, and that negative charge is proportional to its size. So they will migrate from the negative electrode towards the positive electrode, or they will migrate from the cathode towards the anode. Now, how to determine the size? We prepare an agarose gel and we have to load our sample whose size we have to determine, but in presence of a molecular weight marker. So markers are of known size molecules that we run, and these molecules are separated according to their sizes. Smaller molecules running far away from the well, and larger molecules they remaining closer to the well. So you separate these molecular weight markers on the basis of their size by running on the agarose gel, electrophoresing it, and on the second well you load your sample whose size you need to determine. So when you run this sample, it will form a band at a particular position. This can be compared to the band of the known size molecules that we've already run in the first well. So by comparing it, you can know the approximate size of the sample that you are studying. This is one way to find out the size of a nucleic acid molecule. Another method by which we can find out the size of nucleic acid molecules is by electron microscopy. By electron microscopy, DNA is visualized on a grid. So there are grids like this, and these grids are of known sizes, and the size of the DNA molecule can be estimated by comparing it to the size of the grid. So by electron microscopy and by gel electrophoresis, we can find out the size of a nucleic acid molecule. So these are some more properties of nucleic acids. Absorbance and density we discussed in the last lecture. In this lecture we discussed about the denaturation of nucleic acid sample. We discussed about the solubility of nucleic acids, and we discussed about the size of nucleic acid sample. Thank you.